Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are, everybody. Welcome to today's virtual ICEE Environmental Ergonomics seminar. Sorry, there we go. Good start. Start again. Okay, so for those that are joining us for the first time, as this is not the traditional time that we start, you may have missed some of the talks that we've done previously. We've had 4 sessions to date. We started off with what we thought was a topical session based upon the current situation on the theme of isolation. So we had some talks on bed rest models, collecting data in the field, so particularly in the high altitude studies, and a talk from Mark Hines, who has a PhD in physiology and biomechanics, but is also an ultra endurance athlete, so spends lots of time sort of putting the research into practice in extreme isolation in environmental extremes, particularly the cold. We then had a couple of sessions related on the heat theme, so we've had some on heat adaptations, acclimation or acclimatization, the therapeutic applications of temperature and the effects that temperature housing temperature might have on adaptations in animal models. And then last week we had a look at a sort of more behavioral, or the integration of behavioral and autonomic thermoregulation in our thermosensors and integration session. For those of you that haven't managed to catch any of those because the time zone or because you weren't aware, all of those talks and others are all hosted on the linked YouTube page, and you can find that on the ICEE2021.com website. Coming up, just as a little signpost, number of sessions on different environmental extremes coming up. So next week we have a session on pollution. The week after that, we've got 2 guys from the Canadian Olympic team to have an athlete and scientist perspective on preparations for the IAAFs. And then after that, we have a talk on exercising cold. So we're trying to cover as many environmental extremes as possible. These will all take place at the usual, if you like, time of 4 p.m. UK time. However, they will all be hosted on YouTube afterwards for watching at your leisure. We are fully booked in talks, which is really good, right up until the 23rd of July. Every 4 to 6 weeks, we'll try and host one at this time, and that seems to be the case. And then the plan, as of yesterday, is that we'll finish this series with a virtual conference. Particularly going to encourage postgraduate and postdoctoral students to submit work and to present short presentations, because we know that many of you will have been preparing to do so this summer. But with the current situation, we'll be unable to. So sitting on data and you want to get out, and we're going to try and help facilitate that. We only really threw around this idea yesterday, so details will be forthcoming. So that's what we have done, and that is what we will be doing. But there's no need to dwell on today. We're going to stay on heat before we deviate for the next couple of weeks, and we're going to look at it from an occupational perspective, and in particular from firefighters. So we've got two speakers today. We've got Anthony Walker from Australia, who's going to look at it from an applied and scientific perspective, having done his doctorate in the field, but also served as a firefighter, but now sitting behind a desk, but still in a firefighter capacity. And Emily Watkins, who is a recent new colleague of mine, having started at the University of Roehampton, London, at the start of this academic year. Anthony's going to go first, followed by Emily. If you have any questions during the talk, please use the question and answer function. Plan will be to pose a couple of questions to each speaker after their talks. And then if there are any questions which perhaps would merit opinions from both of them, we'll finish off with those at the end. But please do chip in with some questions as we go. Okay, so without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen, and then it will be All yours, Anthony.
Okay. Can you see that? We're good to go. Okay, good evening. Obviously, well, it's evening for me and morning for you guys. So what we want to try and do is we're going to work in parallel, myself and Emily, in what I thought about doing particularly is looking at exactly what is a firefighter and particularly the challenges within that environment. Most of you probably have not had a great deal to do with firefighters in particular. And as such, we're sort of going to work through it, and then Emily's going to come home with a lot more specialist population stuff. So bear with me and we'll go through it. So obviously one of the things with firefighters, and this is pretty much just to get it off the bat, if there's any police out there listening to this or any military, there's a bit of a perception around what firefighters do. And a lot of the time is spent doing a lot of this sort of stuff. We do, it's pretty much 95% boredom and 5% terror and just uncontrolled chaos that we're trying to deal with. So that's where we're going to go with that. Just as I said, I'll go from there. So for those of you I haven't met, I'm based in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia. Here in Australia at the moment, it's coming into winter time. It's just dipping below zero every night now. But during summer, it's above 40 degrees. And the two photos you can see on this page, this was our summer. So at the end of December, looking there at Parliament House, that was the smoke rolling in from the major bushfires. And the photo down below is the extent of what I could see from my backyard. So our summer, even though COVID's hit and it's caused a lot of carnage around the world, our isolation and everything pretty much started for us in December last year. As you can imagine, in summer it's hot with the smoke. All this sort of stuff has caused a few issues for us. As Chris said, my PhD was in 2015, as you can read there, but I'm also a professional urban firefighter. And my last 5 years as a station officer. And for the North Americans, that's probably the equivalent of a lieutenant or a captain. I am currently seconded to the Emergency Services Agency here in the ACT, and where I am the Director of Health and Fitness. So we're moving slightly there, but we're trying to use the applied stuff across a few other works. One of the other things that's there as well is we want to understand that the issue of firefighting, it's a job that does require a lot of effort from people, and most of them throughout their career are harbouring injuries. They're having them. The nature of the job is such, but in Australia here particularly, we're moving to a retirement age of 70, and we need to start to understand how do we look after these people better so that they can last. So in terms of, in its general sense, what's a firefighter? So we basically have two broad categories of firefighters, and I'm going to focus on the urban environment. But what you see down here to the left, you can probably see on my mouse, hopefully. You'll see down here on the left, you'll see that's what we generally consider is a firefighter. That's an urban one. But then over here on the right, you'll see we also have wildland firefighters who, in our country, we call them bush firefighters. And the bulk of those within Australia are volunteers, and most of the firefighters worldwide are volunteers. And for an example there, so New South Wales, the population of professionals is 3,500, yet the volunteers are 72,000. North America, there's nearly 1 million firefighters, and I think over 900,000 of those are volunteers. So we're working with populations that it's not their main job. So when we put them in harm's way, there's a lot of continuing issues where they come from their own. They may have been at work all day, and they're having to manage a lot of other competing interests at the same time. One of the main things here, and it's something that needs to be understood, is that firefighters, in terms of tasking, tend to be the catch-all for everything that everybody else will do. I can't really see. Oh, yes, I can now. So what you'll see there, and this quote here sort of sums it up to me entirely, is the fact that, as I said, our department makes 1,100 calls a day. Do you know how many the public expects perfection on? Nobody calls the department and says, send me 2 dumbass firemen in a pickup truck. In 3 minutes, they want 5 brain surgeon decathlon champions to come out and solve all their problems. And that's essentially the nature of the beast. People call firefighters when things have gone wrong. And it's not good enough for them to, it's not actually good enough for us at any given time to just leave it where we are. Now, in terms of who they are and what makes up a firefighter, as I said, we come from a population, and it's the same population we draw every other industry from. And what that means is that when we're starting to deal with them and how we manage them and how we look after them, what we tend to think of ourselves looking like is this. And in the middle of the night, so when you call 000, that's the Australian emergency number, we have a perception, and we have a perception of ourselves that we look like this. And this is who you think might be coming. In reality, though, this is what firefighters might look like. I mean, they're Americans, so it's a bit different to the rest of us, but you get the general gist. They're general population people, and they're trying to get through a life whereby their career might be 30 or 40 years. They're managing injuries. They're aging like the rest of us are. So we have to be very aware of what we have in front of that. In terms of the environment they work in, so a lot of the stuff, we work in a world of compromise, whereby we will have to compromise something to achieve something else. So you'll find that what they're wearing there is, we call it a self-contained breathing apparatus. In essence, it consists of an air tank, which is down on the back of them. And it also has a positive pressure mask. So the positive pressure mask is so that if it fails, air keeps coming out, which means no smoke or anything can get in. However, to actually activate the pressure to get the air into the mask, it works on a negative pressure flow, whereby what happens is you inhale, you drop the pressure in the mask, that opens a valve and adds air to the environment. What that does, though, as you can probably imagine, is that in terms of from a VO2 perspective, it drops at about 20 to 30% straight off the bat. So when they're working in this environment, they will get very tired very fast. And particularly when we're working with people who aren't fit, have other comorbidities or whatever, these are big issues for us. The main thing it allows us to do is it allows us to work in those environments where it's hazardous. But again, we also need to understand the weight of these things. So it's about 12 kilo, and that's a 300 bar, 6.7 litre cylinder. So you may see bigger ones, you may see heavier ones, and these are fairly modern gear. We're lucky in Australia we do have that, but in a lot of countries they will be using a lot of old stuff. Operational wearing time is highly variable, and it's based on work rate and individual response. But at best, we're going to get about 20 to 30 minutes out of a cylinder. Obviously, tasking changes that. So if it's a full-blown house fire where they're running through doors, kicking indoors, doing whatever, you're probably likely to get 15 to 20 minutes. If they're standing outside just pointing a hose, it could be 30 to 40 minutes. So what these things do is it gives them a limited lifespan in there, but it's affected by how fit they are. And that's something we want to impact if possible. We have turnout gear. Okay, so you'll see in the turnout gear we have, so North Americans, you'll call it bunker gear, and it's essentially structural firefighting clothing. And to protect ourselves from heat and flame, we have to wear this stuff. This is a very modern equipment, and basically it's comprised of 3 layers. So there's an inner layer, so it's just think like your doona. It's basically just there for comfort. There's a flame-resistant outer layer, which is at this stage it's called Nomex, but there's other ones around there. But also within them, in the modern gear, we have a moisture barrier, and it's a Gore-Tex moisture barrier. Some countries don't have this. The current Australian standard is to have this in there. Part of it is to protect us from steam burns, because as you can see up the top here, the way we fight modern fires is not, we don't just get to the front door and start hosing furniture out the back door like we used to. You'll see that they are throwing water up into the air there, and it's a process we call gas cooling. So basically what it does is it controls the environment so that it makes it safer for us to work. That does create increased risk of steam burns because we do throw a lot of water around, and also there's a lot of chemicals that come into it. So that's why we have the Gore-Tex membrane. They wear a flash hood, so just like a racing car driver. The flash hood will protect the head. However, what it does is it also drops the sensation of heat. So if you talk to old school firefighters, one of the big things that they understood when it was dangerous was if their ears started burning, they knew it was too hot and they came out. In modern firefighting, this gear is that good, they can be a long way into a house before they realise they're in danger. So a lot of our training goes around fire behaviour and structural. So that's part of why we throw water up in the air, is to try and control the environment for safety. Gloves, obviously thermal protection, but because they're so thick, we have very limited dexterity with those. But the gear, in terms of what it does, is it creates massive resistance for thermal loss. So obviously the environment in a house fire is probably hotter than we are anyway. However, where this causes us grief is when we wear this stuff in the ambient temperatures. So you'll see firefighters walking around, going to car crashes in this gear. You'll see them fighting wildfires in this gear, whatever it is. And there's a cultural thing we need to start to change with our people, is that this particular type of gear is for aggressive internal firefighting rather than just our uniform. The other thing it does as well is, because it's so bulky and the nature of it, it actually reduces your movement efficiency and increases your metabolic load as you go. So you have to work harder just because you're wearing this gear. Again, it does cause people to get tired quicker, and that's something else we need to be aware of. Oh, hang on, where'd that go? My apologies. Yeah. So in terms of what we wear as well, the boots we wear, obviously they're designed for a purpose. They're very heavy, but what they're designed to do is they're designed to, again, keep us safe in the environment. And our environment, as you can imagine, is unstable. There's potential for impact. There's broken glass, broken metal, whatever it is. So these things are designed to do that. But in terms of their overall design, they're going to be different from other areas. They're going to be flame resistant. Everything is flame resistant. So to some point, if you're in trouble and it gets hot enough, everything catches fire. There is no such thing as flame-proof gear that we wear. It's more about managing risk as we go. In terms of the old generation of gear, and that's what most people are still wearing around. So the boot up in the top right there is the boot I currently wear myself. It has inflexible sole protection. So I think it's a steel base, which means there's limited flexion throughout there. Mainly could be steel, could be modern gear. Toe protection, so there is a steel cap in there. Again, more modern boots will have something more along the line of a plastic, but either way, it increases the rigidity of the boot. It has a rigid ankle. So what you'll see below, even in the lower boot, which is what we call a bunker boot, which is more of an American and British type boot, what used to happen in firefighters is they used to roll ankles quite significantly and quite often. So one way of fixing that was to actually lock the ankle in place. And what that does, and from there you can see when we did testing at the University of Canberra, we did some actual testing on what the impact of this was. And you can see straight off the bat, there's significant increase in ground reaction forces. So basically, and the height they were stepping off there, that's the equivalent to the height of the bottom of the step of a fire truck. So basically they're increasing every time they land, they're increasing their vertical ground reaction force. The other thing which is causing some main issues is that it's also reducing their ankle plantar flexion. So what's happening when they're landing is that they're not actually plantar flexing through the foot, which means we're seeing loads shifting further up the kinetic chain. And interestingly, and where we came from to come up with this sort of planning was we see a lot of lower back injuries in firefighters and lower limbs. So we see knees, we see hips, we see lower backs. And part of this is the loading that's coming from these boots. The problem is these are an actual international standard boot, so that people can't change a huge amount around this. It needs to have the rigid sole. It needs to have the high boot. It needs to have a high enough shaft on it as well, because when we kneel to fight fires, as you can imagine, your pants will ride up. So that needs to have fire protection so that if there's flame, we can't do that. So again, that limits how much flexion can happen within the ankle, within the leg. So we just basically cause problems in our kinetic chain. Obviously we wear helmets. So you can see the general collection that's there, from the American style helmet over here to the left to the very, very European style helmet, the shiny ones, the British one, and the Australian type helmet down here. Common elements of them: top impact protection, some of these newer jet style, so motorbike style helmets have side impact protection. They all have protective visors, so we drop those down before we go into fires. However, and this is where Emily's going to sort of touch on when she moves into female firefighters, is it's one size for everybody. So we tend, and it goes with the same with boots, it goes with everything. We fit the firefighter to the equipment, not the equipment to the firefighter. It's just cheaper that way. And for your own personal benefit, the colour generally denotes rank. So for us, in my jurisdiction, a yellow is a firefighter. I'm an officer, I have a red helmet. My boss has a white helmet. So that's why you see different colours. In Europe, you'll see these more modern jet style helmets. But what they do, and we're having issues where we're trialling them here in Australia, purely because of the amount of heat these things generate and how much thermal strain we're putting on our firefighters. For those guys up in Queensland, they've got a much better idea, but it causes the heat in Australia is just too hot for some of this gear. So most of our gear will stay in these lower lid type style purely for that heat. Americans just not interested in this style of helmet. Yeah, it's just not going to happen. So in terms of what we do, and this is something that's probably a little bit of an eye opener when you start to unpack what firefighters do, remembering we catch everything. But what we generally do is we do structural firefighting. We do wildland firefighting. We do vehicle firefighting. We do aviation firefighting. We do crash rescue. We do rescue, and that could be vertical rescue. So off cliff, we do cliff rescue. We do water rescue. We do cave rescue. We do hazmat. We do a lot of things. And even over here, you'll see down the bottom here, the American wildland firefighters. There's not a fire to be seen. They haven't got a hose, and they fight fires by cutting lines just to create breaks so fires can't get through. So you can imagine on a 40-degree day exactly how hard that is. And particularly for those American wildland firefighters, rhabdo is a big issue for them, and heat stroke. But they're normally lucky. These are they're generally professionals, and they're normally guys in their early 20s. So they tend to be able to sustain a lot more damage than the older guys would. So they get away more with luck than management. And these guys are very, very good at what they do. Hazmat, and this is something you will see in the chem suits as well, the impermeable chem suits. Basically, in terms of how we operate those things, is you can be working with a single SCBA cylinder on your back, which will allow you about 25 minutes of work. But what we tend to do is we twin them. So we put 2 cylinders on our back combined, and that'll extend it to about 50 odd minutes of work. Even on a mild day, a British summer day, 10, 15 degrees, whatever it is, you'll find that you can imagine you're basically living in a plastic bag. And as you can see on the right, this is the outcome of what happens when you get out of these things, that your boots are full of water. It's just revolting. In terms of extended, how we would normally do it, as they come out for decontamination, they're attached to a line, which means they could then stay in there indefinitely. So we have to be very clear when we're managing our firefighters in hazmat type operations. We have to be very wary of knocking them over with heat stress, because because of the environment we ask them to operate. And as you can imagine, the environments we operate, in Canberra, we're the capital city. We have a lot of your embassies. We have a lot of issues with people sending revolting things through the mail to the embassies, which requires us to then go and do full decontamination. So for a long time there, we were doing this almost on a daily basis for our firefighters. Most others probably have never seen this in their career. But again, everything's location-based and risk-based. Regardless of that as well, not only when we think of the fire, we also have to carry an extensive array of very heavy bits of gear. So for crash rescue, the gear we carry, so you'll see them carrying all these photos here. You see all the different styles of cutting equipment. Most of those weigh between 15 and 20 kilograms, and they have to be operated at multiple heights. So you think the guy on the left, you can see the different heights to cut that roof off. He's going to have to be operating above his head with that gear. Modern cars in particular, they're great if you crash in them yourself because you're a lot safer. But for us to get into those has required us to use a lot heavier equipment, a lot more powerful equipment, but with power comes size, and with size comes weight. We're also moving to a battery type. So again, the weights are increasing. And you can see down to the left exactly what like a car crash would look like. Even maneuvering ladders, a 9-meter ladder, that's going to weigh in excess of 20 kilos. We have to carry that. We have to maneuver it. We have to get people up and down off roofs. And over on the bottom right there, you'll see them venting a roof, and that's a very American way to fight fires. So they're up on the roof. They're working very hard. They're carrying things. You don't see that style of firefighting anywhere else in the world other than America. It's because of how their houses are built. The other thing they do as well is we operate in all climates. Again, luckily enough, I don't work anywhere it's near cold enough. They get wet, they get frozen, they get all that sort of stuff. That's going to cause massive issues, particularly as you can imagine, if you've been in fighting a fire in that impermeable gear, you're sweating, it's got nowhere to go, and then all of a sudden you come outside here into this environment, you're going to get people who are hypothermic. So they're going to go from hyperthermic to hypothermic really, really fast if you don't manage what they're up to. They're operating floodwaters. Down the bottom here was, that's a wildland firefighter operating purely in the heat. So not only do we have the heat of the fire, we've got the heat of the engine as well. So from all this, from a perspective of what we have to manage, so you can see here that all this added weight in the equipment and tools results in all these things. So what it does is it creates reduced mobility. So you have to work harder just to move and do your job. Gives us that higher acute load. So they have to work, they're working harder. They're hitting the ground hard. They're swinging things. They're doing that sort of stuff, which is there. They're getting the greater thermal load, which is leading to fatigue. And then what it's creating for us in terms of our risk profile, our main risk profile is we're looking at those slips, trips and falls. So as they get hot, they get tired. They just don't pick their feet up anymore and they fall over, and particularly in unstable environments. We've got cognitive impairment, and it's very hard. Some of the testing we did early on showed that when you get them to focus on on a task, and it can be really complicated, no matter how tired they are, they can really focus acutely on that task. So you can't detect cognitive impairment through most of the testing. However, if you watch them, they'll be making bad decisions. They won't be reading their environment. So it's stuff that it's very hard to predict what they're up to, but you just need to expect that's going to be there. In terms of we then have a higher chronic load of just doing that work. Yet they burn out, they get the chronic injuries, they get the poor mental health, and all that combined will give them reduced career longevity in the ideal world. But again, these guys and girls have to work these careers until they're 60. They're not skilled at many other things in many cases. So what they'll do is they'll be hiding injuries. They'll get themselves onto trucks that don't have the amount of work. They'll end up in comms roles. They'll end up in other roles. But we need to start to intervene in all these things there. And we're just not, as an industry, very good at doing that. So in terms of where we get those heat gains, the main issues for us in terms of a house fire, and I'm going to start to work down that one there because it's the most common to understand. First thing, obviously, is conduction. They're working with hot surfaces. Everything they touch is hot. The radiation is what's going to get us. So, the radiant heat from the fire and the convection cycle. But what you'll see there above is we have the smoke, and that smoke is actually containing heat. And as that fire burns more and more, that smoke gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And then eventually what happens is we have that radiant heat coming straight down on top of them. And you'll see the firefighters, and these pictures are reasonably accurate. When you go into a house fire, you aren't standing up, you're on your face, you're crawling, you're on your hands and knees. And we are trying to control it with these sprays, but a lot of the time we don't. And particularly where you have, say, American firefighters who enter buildings without hoses, they go searching without hose lines. So they're dealing with all these sorts of things that are there. They've got the convection cycle again, and you've got that current, but what's happening is it keeps introducing fresh air as well. So we want to actually control that environment through closing doors, all that sort of stuff. Heat at the ceiling there. So above our head at any time when we're operating, that smoke can be at about 700 degrees before it flashes over. So what we call a flashover is basically when that heat gets so hot and the radiant heat gets so high, every single thing in the room catches fire. Including the firefighter if they get themselves caught in there. That happens at around 800 degrees. So 700 is quite reasonable. But on the floor, we're looking at around about 100 degrees. and firefighters can still operate in that comfortably. And to some extent, we can possibly see survivability of people. One of the really horrible things in our world is that we go searching for people, but if those buildings are in that position where they're that hot, you can imagine how hot that room is. People may not be fire effective, yet they could well be dead from smoke or just that radiant heat. So it's something we need to be very aware of. As the fire develops, the smoke layer drops, reducing visibility to almost zero. It'd be lovely for it to be in the movies where you see them walking around, they can see the bright flames and it looks awesome in the movies, but pretty much you see about this. You're working on touch. When you go in, you're almost holding hands with your partner because you don't want to lose them in the smoke. They can get turned around very fast. And that's what tends to kill firefighters, particularly if they get lost in the smoke, they get hot, they start making mistakes. So our little thing here, that's what we teach our kids at school. If they're caught in a house fire and they see smoke, that's what they do. They get down low and they go. So it's something we work very hard on our kids, but it also is very relevant for firefighters as well, how we work. So in terms of where we actually looked at from a research study perspective, so what we did, and this was part of my PhD, we looked at looking at this study, and particularly we looked at exactly, one, how hot do they get? Two, what's happening to them? And then how do we put them back together? So 120 urban fireys, the purpose-built heat chamber, we had it set at about 100 plus or minus 5 degrees. So the chamber's down there to the right. We filled it with smoke, so they had they were working a lot harder because they couldn't see. But what we had them operating was we set it up so it was like an actual fire, whereby they had two 20-minute work tasks, which is 2 BA sets separated by a 10-minute passive recovery. We measured using the pills, measured their heart rate, but also we measured perceptual stuff just to try and get an idea of what was going on. And then we correlated them. So in terms of how hot they get, it's not really rocket science to understand that they do get hot. But basically what we're looking at here is we're looking at as they get up around that mean point of around that 39 degrees. The issue for us in terms of this, and for those of you who are in an athletic setting, it's a little bit different in that we work in an environment where we have work health safety legislation, and these guys are workers. So if you look at the ISO standard, anything above 38.5 core temp, they're not actually allowed to be at work in any industrial setting. And yet you can see there after only 2 work periods, they're already exceeding that. And to some extent, if you're looking at the error bars, some of them are above, they're exceeding that before they even go into rehab. At this stage, we don't measure them, we just let them go. So again, if in Australia, and I can't comment on other jurisdictions, we've just now brought in a lot of these industrial manslaughter laws for employers, and very much there will be a case where we will kill someone, and that question will be asked: why were they that hot? How did you let them get that hot? And more importantly, why weren't you monitoring them? We don't do any of that. So there's not really anything interesting in that data other than the fact you can see the peak numbers. Heart rates, again, nothing really surprising there. As they get hotter, their heart rate's going up. But what's particularly critical, again, thinking back to the photo of the firefighters you see, we're looking at those 80, 90% max heart rates. When we're dealing with 50-year-old firefighters, 60-year-old firefighters who are already in their at-risk groups, is it really a reasonable thing to have them working in these environments at that heat, at these heart rates as well? So we're kind of asking for this. So again, we need to get them fitter. We need to keep them cooler. In terms of retasking, so the main issue with a fire is it doesn't normally go out in the first cylinder. You're going to have to go back in multiple times. And the guys on the right there for the Brits and the Australians, we're fairly familiar with that photo. That's the Grenfell fire. They had guys and girls going back in 5, 6, 7 times. But what tends to define whether we retask people is we actually ask them, it's basically down to individual perception. So it's, how do you feel? Yep, good to go. And as you can imagine, these are people who are recruited specifically because they like, they're not going to not go in there. If there's someone still in trouble, if there's something that has to be done, they're going to always say, yes, I'm good to go. The problem is sometimes they don't actually know that they're good to go, and they'll make decisions based on their own perception. So again, we we took that out there. So what we're looking at there is we're looking in the dark box lines, we're looking at the actual, we're looking at the physical load. So we're looking at the temperature and the heart rate combined. But what we're looking at down the bottom there is we're looking at their perceptual rating. So if we then ask them at any given time, so you'll see that big drop there. So if we ask them, are you good to go? You know, they've taken their jacket off, they've dumped a bottle of water on their head, whatever they've done, they're actually of the opinion that they're good to go pretty quick. But we saw from the previous data, and this is overlaid on the data before, they're in those situations where they're hot, and in many cases, they're too dangerous to go in. You can imagine they're a decent fire where we're going 5, 6, 7 wears in a row. This will start to come up, but so will that. So we need to start to understand some way of getting a monitoring system on them while they're in fires so that we can take the subjectivity out of them so we can make the decisions for them. Again, unfortunately, it all comes down to money, and monitoring is expensive, and most fire services they're just not interested in investing in that sort of technology, because you can also imagine that if I'm sitting there telling you your people can't go back in, they can't do what they're paid to do. So they're not actually delivering the service. My fire service has 9 fire trucks. I can't throw 100 fire trucks at things. We have to operate with what we've got. So, once the 9 trucks are used up, what do? The fire's still going. So, you look at the Grenfell, they sent hundreds of trucks to that thing and they still couldn't get it out. In terms of post-fire rehab and cooling, so the current practice around the world is just on the left there. Give them a bottle of water, sit in the shade. It's just what we do, and we still do that now. 5 years post-PhD, this is still what my fire service does. Many of them, however, are doing their best to try and implement proper rehab. And what you'll see on the left on there is you'll see these chairs. These are called a core cooler. So if anybody who hasn't seen them, these have crept into fire services. You don't really see them anywhere else, but they're trying their hardest in many cases. So what we thought we'd do is we'd actually look at this and we started to think, how can we actually do some better rehab on scene? Bearing in mind, fire, it's kind of like the military. When we show up with lots of equipment. We show up lots of trucks, lots of other things that we could start doing these meaningfully. So 15-degree water for 15 minutes was one option. The ice slush was the second option. And then the third option was just the bottle of water sitting in the shade. And what we found again, so looking at that core temperature, and we're looking to the end over here, is where we're mainly looking. You can see what we've got here. So the circles, the cold water immersion, the squares, the slush, and the open circles, the passive control. But what we see here is, particularly with the slush and the cold water immersion, they're pretty well back to baseline within that 15 minutes. However, what we see when we're doing nothing at all with them, we're still, the mean of the population is still at 38 degrees. And many of those are still going to be in excess of that. And that's with 15 minutes of effort. In terms of what's there, obviously we work in the real world. So we have to look at practicality versus there. Water immersion is it's not massively practical in the world. However, an ice slush could be. So again, we have to start presenting options to people that are both workable, but also have some science in them. The core cooler chairs there, if you look at the data from those chairs, they're no better than the passive recovery. But again, people have locked into them and they want to be seen to be doing well. The next thing we got that's a big issue for firefighters, and it's going forward, is the mental health in the fire service. It's something it's starting to knock our people off a lot. And you're starting to see that particularly with so a lot of it's to do with fatigue. A lot of it's to do with the nature of the people that we employ is that they're not, and again, it comes down to mainly it's a male population. And there's still very much a stigma around mental health, whereby they won't seek help. They're just not because they don't want to, they just don't have the ability, they don't have the network. So we're spending a lot of time at the moment on mental health, trying to fix these problems. And this was a model, a physiological model we threw up a few years ago, just as a bit of a thought bubble about what else could be causing the PTSD, because most of our mental health support, it relies on you've seen a dead body, so now you're sad. It's a very simplistic model to that. And what we wanted to look at, and some of this is proven, some of this is very theoretical, but we wanted to start to see what else is happening in the environment that may be changing their physiology. And she's got some data looking at this, particularly when we're looking at the cytokines, the pro-inflammatory stuff. And we know that being exhausted is going to cause it. We know that smoke does it. We know that heat does it. We know that sleep restriction does it. But what we start to see is, well, maybe the acute traumatic event, which we all focus on now, really isn't the issue. It's the issue is we pre-prime these men and women through these other things we do to them. So the question is then, if we reduce the heat exposure and don't get them as hot, is that going to have potential help? Can we invest in proper sleep education for them? Do we get them fitter so they're not physically exhausted? So again, these for anybody who's sort of wanting to look into potential research in this population, and this is just as relevant for military, police, anybody. I think these are the questions we need asked. We already know they get hot. These are the more important things now for us. These are the last couple of slides we're looking at, and we're looking at cancers now causing some issues for us. It always has, but it's now become fairly relevant. So it's the number one killer of firefighters worldwide now, and it's driven by exposure to chemicals. And if you look at the thing on the side here, and Paul Combs does some great sort of things here, you look at the two photos of the firefighters, they're dirty, they're sooty, but that's what they want to look like. It's that old school mentality, you don't wash your gear because if you wash it, you're soft, or you've never seen a firefighter, you've never seen a fire. The new guys have clean gear. It's still a mentality that's out there. We're trying to knock it out of the services, but it's going to take, like anything, it takes a generation. And again, you're working with those guys, particularly who this is what they do. During firefightings, you get it, so that goes through the non-protected areas. And the flash hoods that we saw before, what we're finding is they're incredibly permeable to smoke. So the smoke's actually coming through, and most of the contamination happens around the lower neck. Through the groin, so there's a lot of issues with groin. It goes up through the bottom of the pants because as they walk, it sort of bellows and creates that vacuum, and up it goes. Post-fire, during overhauls where they really get issues, they just don't wear their BAs. They wear the BAs when they can see the fire, but they don't wear it when it's going in there. And then burnt materials continue to off-gas. So personal tip for anybody who ever goes near a fire, the most dangerous thing of the fire is actually after it, when it still smells. That's what's going to get you. Most of us wear light coloured PPE now. And the reason we do that is we can actually see the contaminants on the gear, and it's a prompt for them to do that. However, again, a lot of old school ones still have black. Why? Because that's what we've always worn. Some of them are moving to decontamination on scene. Multiple sets of gear. I have 3 of them. Is my personal issue. If I run out, they just give me more. Many services, particularly those volunteer ones, they'll have 1 set of gear. So you can imagine they're just going to wear it again and again and again and again. In terms of how serious this is, so we're lucky in Australia, and Canada I think has got it, is that we have a presumptive legislation for this. So this shows exactly how dangerous this job is. And there was a specific amendment to the Safety Rehabilitation Compensation Act. And you can see up there all those things now. It's if I can get any of those cancers from a workers' compensation perspective, I no longer have to prove it. So these are the cancers that firefighters get more than anybody else in the population, but they're based on service time. Britain, not even close. America, not even close. It's a cultural thing, but it's also a cost thing. We're just lucky that we've gone down that path in Australia. This is the big challenge. For anybody who wants to work with this population, this is your biggest issue that's there. Common sense in the middle is very hard to achieve, and it's not really common. You've either got one side of it, which is the risk management, whereby you don't ever expose people to risk. If that happens, no one ever gets saved. But on the other side, you've got the meathead that just, if you show any sort of weakness, you're a problem. So they'll give you that sort of hard time. And the other thing as well, and again, I apologize for the firemen. I realize that it should be firefighters, but it's an old photo. If you're going to work with us in any way, these are the 2 big things you're going to have problems with. They hate change and they hate the way things are. So you're going to hear both of those. And if you're coming in as the change person, you're going to hear them whinging about the problem. You give them the solution and they're going to hate that too. It's just the nature of the beast, and that's what happens when you work with them. Yeah, so thank you for your time. I hope I've given you something there, and hopefully, as I said, I've set up Em for a good sort of chat.
Great. Thank you very much, Anthony. That was a really good, thorough overview. Lots of things I knew nothing about, especially how many volunteer firefighters there are relative to, if you like, employed firefighters. I mean, I'm not sure that number would go up if you went through that presentation with them, as it seems that there's there's a whole host of things that are going to get you. I've got a few questions, but I think a lot of them might be a bit more relevant at the end with Emily. But one thing I just thought might be worth commenting a little bit more on is you said you're trying to balance the risk versus reward, obviously, of every single situation. And you've got a lot of individuals who are basically probably pre-selected to override any sort of perceptual drivers to stop, to rest, whatever. How do you balance your responsibility to the public versus your responsibility to your crew when making those sorts of calls? Or do they just say, I'm good, and you just trust them?
It's always that balance that's there. In terms of our hierarchy of what we prioritize. So we prioritize protecting life. We prioritize protecting property. Then we prioritize protecting the environment. Those are our three criteria. Unfortunately, as I said, if you see a house fire, you pull up, people are screaming at you, there's people in the house, whatever it is, at some point, the environment becomes unsustainable for life other than us going in there. So it's a horrible call, which I've never had to make, thankfully, in that you at some point, your experience, your ability, and one of the beauties of it is we are a rank-based system whereby they will do what they're told. So it all does rest on the incident controller to start making those tough calls. I can only imagine it would be incredibly hard to make your crew stand back when someone's dying inside. But at the end of the day, I have a responsibility to my crew to keep them on task. The problem is we don't have enough information to make a lot of those calls. We have to rely on the fact that they're professionals. We've got a lot of young firefighters now. I'm going to watch them a lot harder than I would an older firefighter, just because they have that experience. The other side of it is you may have some of the older guys who are just going to tell you they're knocked up, and they're not really, because they just don't want to go back in. So it's both sides you've got to play off a bit too.
And one quick one just coming from Jason Boynton. Are you aware of any research that's been done specifically with any sort of heat acclimation? I know Emily's probably going to do a little bit, but perhaps I'll leave that a bit more for her, but do you do anything deliberately in the way of acclimation or not?
Not really. I think the problem is we're working over a 12-month cycle, and house fires or structural fires nowadays, they make up less than 3% of our work rate. Most of our work isn't that, so they don't get a heat load at all. So short answer, as I said, Em will probably cover it off. Short answer is no, I don't think anyone's done the research. There's definitely advantage to it. We know that as we move into summer, so we're 5 months out from our next bushfire season, we should be doing that sort of stuff for our volunteers. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's definitely a hole in the research.
Cool. There's another couple of questions which I'll leave you to answer in the type function. But thanks for that. We'll pass over to Emily. So Emily, if you want to share your screen, that'd be fantastic.
Right, hello, can we all hear me now?
We're good.
Perfect, thanks very much. So, morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. Thank you, Anthony, for kind of starting us off. For those of you that kind of haven't met me before or don't know me, I'm Dr. Emily Watkins, so I work at the University of Roehampton now. I was at the University of Brighton beforehand, that's where I did my PhD, and I've been working with the fire service probably for about kind of 7 or 8 years now, on various different aspects. But most of my work has been focusing on specific populations within firefighting. So that's what I'm going to talk about this morning. And my presentation is really split into 2 separate parts. So the first part will be discussing instructors, and the second part discussing women in the fire service. A lot of the research that thinks about firefighters groups firefighters as one big kind of group itself. And as Anthony's kind of alluded to a little bit, there are different people and different roles within that. We spoke about volunteers, you've got professionals, but you also have other individuals and other roles as well. So this is just two of those that have perhaps specific considerations that need to be thought about. So if we start off with our instructors, so by a fire instructor, what I mean is individuals who train firefighters. So in this image here, there are guys in our kind of black cap over here and our red helmet over here. So they're training these 3 firefighters at the front, and they do that through a few different ways. So they set fires in different types of buildings on purpose, and then train those firefighters how to put out those fires, how to search, how to rescue, and the different skills that they need. And what that means is that these instructors do quite a different job than a normal firefighter. They set conditions, they instruct, they observe, they're responsible for the safety of those firefighters too. But it also means that they experience a fire much more frequently than what a normal firefighter does. So as Anthony was saying a moment ago, in terms of the acclimation, it's slightly more difficult because your firefighter might experience a fire once a month, twice a month, is kind of the average, whereas an instructor on average experiences about 13 fires a month. And that's an average. So from our survey of fire instructors, we've actually found that some experience up to 40 exposures a month. That means they're going in a fire twice a day, 5 days a week, every week of that month, for all of the months that they're at work, other than obviously if they're on annual leave. So those figures that Anthony was showing you, where you have those increases in core temperature and that increase in heart rate, you've got that break perhaps, and then you're going back in. That's what an instructor is doing every day for their working life, essentially, if that for the duration of their career as an instructor. Now, the average number of exposures that instructors report is around 9. And what we actually find is that around 45% of instructors don't have any kind of recommendation in terms of the number of exposures they should be doing, or at least they're not aware of any within their service. So those that do report this value of 9, and essentially it's guidance, but very unsupported in terms of research evidence at the moment. And what we're going to talk about through this presentation is some of the evidence behind that and what these exposure numbers might be doing. So Anthony mentioned some of those acute consequences, that increase in heart rate, that increase in core temperature, potential risks of heat exposure in terms of those heat illnesses you might experience, and also a little bit to do with cancer exposure. And really, from our perspective, we're starting to look at instructors in terms of the more chronic consequence. So what impact is this 13 exposures or more each month progressively, cumulatively having on our instructors? And so the first aspect could be potentially to do with the cancer risk. So they're having a lot more contaminants exposure, but on the other side, they're having contaminants from a known source. So instructors typically set fires burning specific materials, so pallets or OSB board, and that means that they're not exposed to the range of chemicals that a normal firefighter might be. We're looking at this at the moment in a project that we're doing at the moment, collecting some data on this to try and work out what is going on in terms of instructors' cancer and contaminants exposure specifically. The other aspect we have of this is how our instructors are actually feeling. And we started this work from anecdotal reports of instructors feeling quite tired, feeling burnt out, and not being able to last in the job for very long, perhaps, or leaving before they felt they wanted to because of health situations. And so we conducted a survey of our instructors, and what we found was around 41% of them had symptoms of ill health that they hadn't had before they started the job. And these were a cluster of symptoms that were specific to instructors. The firefighters we surveyed didn't have the same responses. And they said they felt extreme fatigue, they were getting headaches, some of them were reporting heart palpitations, they were getting mood swings, night sweats, so heavy sweating as well, and things such as muscle and joint pain too. So this kind of cluster of symptoms that was specific to the instructors. And some of them were reporting things like these quotes that I've popped on here for you. So feeling exhausted all the time, and being worried about their health and the number of exposures that they're actually doing. So just an overall concern. 39%, for instance, of our instructors said they were worried about the number they were doing and possibly thought they might be doing too many. So very much more from a chronic perspective than an acute. And this kind of led us to think, well, what can we do about it? Where is this coming from? And what do we actually know? Because when we started this, we knew very, very little about instructors at all. So we started by getting them to do some exercise for us in a heat chamber and look at how they respond to an acute thermal load. So are they responding in the same way as a normal ordinary individual? So we got them in our lab, walking on a treadmill in kit, 50 degrees in our heat chamber. Unfortunately, we don't have a nice 100-degree heat chamber like Anthony does. So 50 degrees is the max out that we could manage on that one. And then we looked at their core temperature responses alongside their heart rate, sweat rate, and kind of perceptual responses. And what we found here is that our instructors demonstrate a response very similar to an acclimated athlete. So if any of you were watching Chris's presentation a few weeks ago, he talks about how you adapt to heat exposures if you've done a few in repetition, and you get a reduction in core temperature, reduction in heart rate, increased sweat response, improved thermal perception perhaps. And we see that in our instructors. So this is a nice continuum here of core temperature. So on here, you've got the end core temperature responses of different individuals. So our instructors are in our triangles and our control group is in our circle on here. So this is the core temperature they finished up their 40 minutes of exercise in the heat for. And what we see is our instructors sit further down in this zone here, in our green zone is what we've called, so below 38 degrees at the end of their exercise. And then we are spread out, so we do have some across and one ending up here, 38.9. But in general, our fire service instructors had around a 0.4 degree lower end core temperature than our control group did. They had an improved thermal perception, and they also had an increase in sweat rate. So overall, our instructors are showing heat acclimation. And that's good in that if you're heat acclimated, you're less likely to experience a heat illness. You've got an kind of improvements in how you might perform in that heat environment as well. And we started to think about whether that was linked to the number of exposures these individuals were doing. So we then popped our graph against our exposure number up here on the side. So again, our instructors are on here on triangles and our control group along here with no exposures. And we start to see that perhaps there's an association between the number of exposures individuals are doing and the kind of level of heat tolerance that they've developed. We also looked at their inflammatory response. So Anthony kind of mentioned earlier on about these cytokines and this inflammatory response that we get as a result of this acute heat exposure. And what we found was our instructors and our control group responded in exactly the same way. So they had an increase in this inflammation, just as you would expect, and to the same kind of level of an increase. But what was of particular interest to us was that the resting levels of these markers, so I've picked two out here, so IL-6 and interleukin-1 beta, the resting levels of these were much greater in our instructors than in our control group. And these markers are important for, I suppose, a few different reasons. One being, as Anthony alluded to, is the relationship between them and things like depression and changes in mood. And that's to do with possibly things to do with what's called sickness behaviors. So these cytokines, these messengers, communicate with our brain and actually can produce feelings of extreme fatigue, mood changes, malaise. So that's kind of the one aspect of it. The other side of this is that inflammation is linked to atherosclerosis. And actually an increase in some of these markers can suggest an increased risk category of a cardiovascular event. So two reasons why these inflammatory markers might be important and why high levels of them could be of a concern within instructors. So overall, that means our instructors do develop heat tolerance, so less likely to experience a heat illness, so a good thing perhaps, but also that these high numbers of exposures are perhaps linked to ill health, sickness behaviours and these high levels of inflammatory markers. So almost as if we have an adaptation, which is good, but if we progress to experiencing these heat exposures on a much higher frequency, perhaps we go beyond that point and start seeing a maladaptation occurring. And so that gave us a little bit of a snapshot in terms of a few participants. And really what we wanted to know was what was going on in terms of this inflammation and this immune function in a much larger proportion of individuals. And so we recruited around 50 firefighters and 50 instructors from different services across the UK, and we took a one-off blood sample from them and asked them about their working history. We looked at a lot of different markers, such as the IL-6s, some white blood cells, some platelets. And so what I'm going to present here is just a few of these findings. This has actually just been accepted for publication in Experimental Physiology. So if you want to read the whole thing, that should be out soon for everyone to kind of get access to. And essentially on this, what we found was, so I've just picked a few bits out for you. So IL-6 here, again, we found an increase in instructors compared to our firefighters. And on this graph, you should be able to see this kind of dotted line across here. And that dotted line represents an increase in risk of a cardiovascular event. So above that kind of line puts these individuals in the upper category, this upper quartile of healthy ranges. And individuals in that upper quartile are said to have a 2.3 increased risk of a cardiovascular event comparison to those that are below that. So as we can see, our average is just sitting around that line, and we do have quite a number of instructors that sit in above that section. If we have a look at some of those other markers that we've been measuring as well, so we have C-reactive protein on there, that's an acute phase protein. That's again, one of those things that if you went to the doctors and they might measure it to do with your level of cardiovascular risk, a few more cytokines and some white blood cells on there as well. And overall what we found was a lot of these markers were greater in our instructors. But typically the averages were within healthy range. It wasn't the case that every single marker was above the healthy level and at-risk level. As you can see, there's quite a lot of crosses here showing that actually the majority of these values sat within the healthy normal range that we would expect. I suppose the thing to point with that is that this is our average of our instructors, and our instructors vary a great deal in the number of exposures that they are actually completing. So we then started to map that. So here again, we're looking at our exposure number along the bottom this time and our levels up the side. And so we're plotting the level of those kind of inflammatory markers against the exposure number. And this time we start seeing this association perhaps being occurring in that the more exposures individuals doing, it looks like the kind of the higher the levels of these markers that we might actually be getting. And from some regression analysis, age wasn't a factor, BMI was only a 3% factor in C-reactive protein, time in service wasn't important here. Actually, the thing that was important from this regression analysis was the monthly exposure number. And overall, around 19% of the variance in our IL-6 was to do with our exposure number, and 25 and 26% for our C-reactive protein and interleukin-1 beta were to do with this monthly exposure number. Now, 19-25% is not everything, of course. That's not all variation explained. And we know that there's perhaps a lot of other things going on that might be involved here. For instance, the stress part that we haven't really teased out of this yet. Things like high blood pressure, for instance. So there are other things that perhaps come into play here as well. But overall, those completing more than 9 exposures a month were between 6 and 12 times more likely to be in the upper reference limits for these particular markers. So that kind of 9 value that was anecdotally reported is perhaps a reasonable guidance to help try and keep our instructors within kind of safe zones here. As I said, there are other things that could potentially be coming into play here. And this study obviously only offers a one-off snapshot. We took one blood sample at one time point at rest. But really we needed that to then be able to build upon and see where we needed to go with this and how we needed to look into this further. So at the moment, me and everyone else in our team are currently in the process of analysing the data for a 6-month monitoring study that we've been conducting within the UK. That's involved lots of different I think we've got around 100 firefighters and around 50 odd instructors involved in that, and a little control group too, to look at how these markers may change over 6 months, and to try and delve deeper into some of those psychological factors, so to do with depression and to do with fatigue as well. And hopefully, once we're allowed back in the lab to finish off some of our sample analysis, we should be able to share those results with you. Ideally, in the next ICE conference would be great, but so depends how long we can get back in a lab for. But yeah, so alongside that, we also have some contaminants data we've been collecting as well. So hopefully we might be able to match that alongside this and see whether there's an interplay there too. So in terms of our instructors, where does that then leave us? What does it actually mean? So as Anthony kind of mentioned a little bit, we've got this high level of physiological strain and possibly some contamination. And really, if we can use some interventions to try and reduce the strain from these acute sessions, hopefully that means the cumulative load will be reduced overall. And that might mean we're not seeing the cumulative consequences in terms of these health situations. And this might mean things like ensuring you're hydrated, using pre and post cooling techniques, making sure people are decontaminating, quite hopefully easy little steps in some cases that can kind of add up to improving this overall situation. A lot of training centres here in the UK have now got ice slurry machines or kind of crushed ice machines, and they're using those before and after exposures, both from a perspective of cooling, but also ensuring they're hydrated as well. So it works in both ways. And that's really good actually, that our kind of training centres have really got on board with that and really starting to try and look after instructors too. We know that our working practices of instructors can lead to heat tolerance, which is good in a fact of they're kind of adapting in it and improving their ability to perform in those heat situations. The slight caveat to that being that instructors need to be aware that the trainees and the individuals, the firefighters they're working with, will often be feeling a more severe heat strain in that situation than they are, and therefore to be aware of that for the safety of the individuals they're working with. We think that too many exposures might be increasing the risk of these ill health symptoms and possibly these markers that predict cardiovascular events. And so there's almost a balancing act to play here in terms of enough exposures to have this heat tolerance and to maintain that, but perhaps not so many up to the 40 a month, for instance, that's actually causing these symptoms and possible risk to our instructors. And that ideally coming out of this, we really should be monitoring our instructors much more frequently than what we're monitoring our firefighters. And we probably need more comprehensive kind of fitness and medicals than we are giving firefighters. Yes, measuring blood pressure is important, but are we asking them about these symptoms? Are we recording the number of exposures these individuals are doing? Are we measuring or looking at any of these markers in the blood? Are we thinking about doing any of these things? And while some of it might come down to cost in terms of, okay, running blood analysis, obviously it's going to cost a lot of money, but other aspects perhaps easier to do. And we need to make sure there's that match up between those that are doing the medicals and the kind of need that instructors have. So it's this awareness that instructors are different. They have different physiological kind of consequences of their role because of the chronic nature of it. And so to really maximize their potential, these are highly skilled individuals, and we should be aiming to keep them in those highly skilled roles for as long as possible for the benefit of our fire services. But it's really about making sure we look after them to enable that to actually happen. Okay, so that's my fire service instructor bit. So population 1 done, which brings me to population number 2. So the second group to really kind of focus on here are women within the fire service. Typically, research across numerous fields, so across military, across medical institutions, predominantly have male participants as their kind of key participants. And that's really where a lot of research and a lot of kind of fundamental physiology is all based on, which is fine. Except from we're now in situations where there are certain populations that never used to have female kind of involved in those activities, but now we do. So globally, the number of women in the fire service is increasing. Within the UK, recently 64% of our kind of overall employees are female, and recruitment of women within the fire service has been increasing across the years. So 2018, 2019 in the UK, 16.6% of new firefighters were women. So it's a case that we've got growing numbers in the fire service, and that actually any policies that we have or working practices should reflect the need of all staff. And if all of our research is only based on males, then we're not reflecting the need of all of our staff. And in some cases, it might be that there is no physiological difference, there is no need for anything different to be occurring, but there are some situations where there might be. And so I'm just going to talk through quickly a few of those things that might, from a physiological perspective, be different, and then some of the things that we can learn and what we might want to do in the future to develop on this. So why might it be important to consider the physiological differences between men and women? So from a very much heat perspective, we're thinking now to begin with. Typically, if you take a man and a woman of the same weight, same height, the man will have a lower body fat percentage than the woman would do. So women typically will have a higher body fat percentage. And this is important because fat has a lower specific heat capacity, and it also means you have an increase in subcutaneous layers, which typically altogether mean that you're more likely to heat up quicker. And if you're heating up quicker, more likely to have higher core temperatures, higher physiological strain that you're experiencing, and so theoretically more likely to have a heat illness. We also see a difference in sweat rate between men and women. So this nice figure from Havanith here, the part at the bottom shows a male's torso, front and back, and then the one at the top shows a female. So darker areas is more sweat, and as you can see, there's much more dark areas on males than there are on females. And from the data we've collected in our labs with female firefighters and from kind of field-based work, we see that men typically have about 1.4 litre per hour sweat response, whereas women typically have about a 0.6 litre per hour sweat rate. And why that's important in a normal environment would be that the more you sweat, the increase in your evaporation, and so the better your heat dissipation works. And so if you have an increased sweat rate, you're more likely to be able to cool yourself down and maintain your core body temperature. The difference becomes in a fire environment in that we're going to go and stick some PPE on top of you and stop you from being able to dissipate that sweat. And so actually you're in a slightly different situation than the majority of people when we're talking male versus women sweat rate. And we haven't done the research on this, but theoretically, if you have a reduced sweat rate and you're doing multiple exposures in a row, you're actually then maintaining your hydration. And so perhaps this almost has the reverse role in terms of males and females on sweat rate, or at least perhaps sweat rate isn't having the impact that perhaps it normally is because of the PPE we're adding. It's just an issue that I suppose we need to think about in a different way, but at the moment there isn't really any research to kind of follow this, support this, or kind of discuss the impact that PPE might be having specifically to do with sweat and kind of male and female differences here. So if I bring you back to our nice continuum that we looked at earlier on when we were talking about instructors, I've circled a few people on here, and they are my females within our group. So we had a few females, 2 in each group, we were matched, and we actually see that they sit within that kind of population. Okay, these 2 instructors might be slightly further up, but there is a male instructor further up that kind of coped worse than they did. And our kind of females within our control group are fairly spread. And overall, what this kind of suggesting is that whilst the literature tends to say that women cope worse in the heat, women are more likely to get heat illnesses perhaps, I don't think it's quite so cut and dry as that. And actually within the fire service, the majority of females are incredibly fit in kinds of comparison to the general population, typically as a result of the fitness standards that are required to actually get in the service and to maintain. And actually it's those body characteristics that might be more important here, more important to focus on than perhaps the male-female difference. It's more perhaps about the body body fat percentage and that aerobic fitness that is coming into play here that we need to kind of think about. And that's something that females and men should be aware about, and something that both can do something about in terms of looking after their body fat percentage and kind of keeping up with their aerobic fitness. And that perhaps should be more of the focus in terms of what those individual characteristics are a little bit more. There is also then issues to do with menstrual cycle, in terms that literature suggests that with our changes in menstrual cycle phases, we get increased core temperature in the luteal phase, so the second half of the kind of cycle, than what we do with the follicular phase. And therefore, what impact might that have on our ability to cope and respond in heat? And then there's also aspects to do with the menopause that come into play here too. So we know that as we age, we reach a peak in terms of strength and bone mass, and then this decreases with age, both for men and women. With research suggesting that for females, the menopause has an impact and increases this kind of bone and strength loss. So you get a bigger dip down here too. And so there are factors that are specific to women that perhaps we need to focus on, or at least answer some questions about, to know whether we need to do something about them or not. So rather than me sitting here and deciding that I know what to focus on and I know what we should look at, myself and Anthony and Eric from the Netherlands and Sarah Yanka from over in America got together and decided that perhaps we should actually start by asking women in the fire service what was important to them, what was their concerns, and where should we be focusing our attention. So that's what we did. So we set up a survey. We asked them about PPE, we asked them about training, we asked them about facilities, asked them what was important to them, different health questions. And overall, we had around 840 responses across kind of quite a few different nations. And we've grouped them together into UK and Ireland, USA and Canada, mainland Europe, and then Australia and New Zealand here. This paper is available, so this survey is all written up and published. I won't discuss everything now because there was a lot of questions in it, but I've just picked out a few that are relevant to kind of the aspects that we're talking about here. So we asked them whether they were currently experiencing the menopause, and if they were, whether it was having any impact on their working life at all. 17% of those that responded were either peri or menopausal, and 39% of those said that they were affected at work as a consequence of their kind of symptoms. And they said the reason that they were impacted was to do with these things that are on the slide here. So fatigue, dizzy spells, strength loss, hot flushes was the main one that got reported here, and mood swings. So all factors that could impact your ability to effectively work in a kind of an environment, and in an office might be of an issue, but if we think about entering a fire, then perhaps that's something that is a bit more important, especially things to do with perhaps the hot flushes. We also asked women that weren't menopausal if it was something they were actually worried about. Was this something that bothered them? Was it something they were thinking about coming into their future and they were concerned about what was going to happen? And we found that 36% were. So within the fire service, there's concern. And most of it came down to what changes were going to happen in terms of strength and fitness, concern for kind of mental health, but most importantly on here, a lack of knowledge. And a lot of this comes down to, we just don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's in place for us. We don't know what we can do about it. And so we're then worried. And actually some of these things we can do things about, such as the strength and fitness. That's something that women can be supported at and help them, so that isn't then a concern and it isn't something. And if we flick back to the one before, strength loss here was something that they felt was impacting them at work, and so that's something that actually we can target and help to improve so that this isn't an issue. We finally asked them as one of the last questions whether they felt confident that they would be able to meet the demands of their job at the age of 60. And this goes back to what Anthony was saying in terms of we've got an aging workforce, retirement ages are increasing, and therefore we're asking people to maintain their fitness standards. And here their ability was, they suggested only 16% of them were confident they would be able to do this. And the main reasoning behind this was to do with meeting those fitness standards, with strength being a specific interest here, things to do with mental toughness, injuries and pain, and the impact that the menopause was going to have. And two quotes that I picked out for you were to do with I don't know, but I'm going to give it a good damn try. The changes in retirement age are kind of, we feel a bit let down, and that perhaps you haven't included in here the consequences of the menopause. You've grouped men and women together and not thought about the fact that perhaps the menopause might make this slightly more difficult with an aging population. And also the fact that the lack of information and guidance available, and that most women who are a firefighter are going to go through the menopause within the age of their working life. And so what are we putting in place as a consequence? Now, Anthony mentioned this before, and no mention of women was even mentioned in the conversation at all. And that's because this is for men and women. Regardless, it's going to be difficult to do this job at 60, 70 years of age. And so other than the menopause on here, all of these aspects will apply to males as well. And so all of these are things that we need to be thinking about in terms of our population moving forward. So we have started to look into some of these factors. So that kind of highlighted a few areas that perhaps we need to do some research in. And so we've made a start, essentially. We've started off by looking at the impact of the menstrual cycle in different phases. So there's some research out there that suggests, so this figure on the left-hand side here, that there's a difference between core temperature in terms of the luteal phase and the follicular phase, and this continues through when you do exercise in the heat. And it means you're going to end up with a higher core temperature in your luteal phase. There's other research that suggests that's just not the case. And whilst there might be differences at the beginning, by the time you get to kind of higher intensity exercise, there's actually no difference at all in terms of core temperatures. So there's a bit of a variety going on. Some of these tests use 30 minutes of exercise. Some, like this one here, was 90 minutes of exercise, none of which include PPE. So we decided to make it specific to our firefighters. So we looked at our 40-minute tolerance test, so the maximum real time you're going to be able to get out of VA cylinder in the heat, in our PPE, and tried to see what the difference were in our two phases. So we've just finished this data collection. So we've had 17 participants through this. I think our average age is about 33, ranging from 18 up to 45, I think our eldest might be. So trying to really reflect the age range of our firefighters. So these are all individuals with regular menstrual cycles, and they're not on any contraception. And we see that our follicular and luteal phases pretty much match up. And we don't have any change in core temperatures in terms of the differences between the two. We're very similar at the end. And what we actually found was there's such a large variation in core temperatures across our participants that we just don't get very much difference at all. And so from a perspective of female firefighters, and that specific environment that they might be working in, the phases of the menstrual cycle don't seem to be putting anyone at an increased risk of higher core temperatures. We also then been starting to look at the menopause as part of this as well. So what the consequence of going through the menopause might be. And initially the thought might be that you're going to have increased hot flushes and therefore you're going to get hotter. The concept behind that is actually slightly different in that hot flushes typically be that you initiate a sweat response at a sooner kind of time point. So your heat dissipation kicks in perhaps before the majority of people might. And what we actually see here when we map our menopause participants against the regular cycles for the follicular phase is that the ladies in the menopause actually don't seem to be having an increased core temperature response at all. And at the moment, we haven't quite had enough participants through this. Unfortunately, we've had to stop because we can't be in the labs. But at the moment, it's suggesting that at least there's no difference between these two groups, and that actually being in the menopause might not increase your risk in terms of end core temperature responses. What is quite interesting here, though, is that some of our ladies actually started to experience a hot flush during the exercise environment. And so it's perhaps not core temperature itself that is the aspect of interest. Perhaps it's more the sensation, the kind of skin temperature reception and your thermal perception of these responses that is actually the key here. And that might mean that if there's things we can do to improve that aspect, then perhaps we can work to improve the hot flush scenario. But again, that's just kind of ideas at the moment in terms of where we move forward with this. Because this isn't about saying menopausal women shouldn't go in a fire. This is about saying, let's understand what the risks are, and then hopefully we can do something about it so that we can maximize their potential. And so we'll come back to my continuum, and this time I'm going to add our females data to it. So we've got our instructors and our controls. Our squares are now our women on here. So these are our female participants. And that's our data on top. So our squares are now our regular cycles, and our kind of coloured in squares are our menopausal women. Our body fat percentages and everything else aren't matched between the two kind of sets, as in the women and the other group down here, because it wasn't the same study. But just conceptually, so you can see how this looks. Our females perhaps are slightly further up into this kind of red section here, so perhaps they are having a kind of higher core temperature response. But again, we have females that are sat here and one all the way down here who responded really, really well and coped great with the heat exposure. And again, with our menopausal women, we are spread out. We're not finding a cluster of female participants up here that have responded really badly, had really high core temperatures and really struggled. We've very much got an array of data, the same as what we do with our control group that had males within it. And this kind of brings back to the fact that it's not as simple as saying women are worse in the heat, and that actually it might be factors such as body fat percentage, different things to do with aerobic fitness that might be more important here for us to try and look at in terms of what's actually going on. So what does that all mean kind of all together? Women in the fire service not necessarily more likely to get a heat illness than men, but there are many changes that could benefit all staff, things like strength training support, correct fitting PPE, kind of extra information being shared around staff. So there's plenty of changes that will benefit everybody. That we need a better understanding of the impact of ageing within the fire service, and we need more things in play to actually do something about it. If we can't change policy in terms of retirement age, then the best thing we can do is support staff to help them kind of last as long as we can. And that might mean that we have interventions in place and extra things to do with training to help them in the long run. And finally, that our menstrual cycle phases don't seem to be impacting in terms of symptoms of heat illness or in terms of core temperature response within firefighters specifically. I hope that this has given you a little bit of an insight into the different populations that we're talking about here. And specifically for female firefighters, we are talking about, we feel like we've almost opened up a Pandora box of questions with our survey. There are plenty of different areas that are of interest and that we want to be looking into. And hopefully it's a case that as we develop this and as we move forward, we'll be able to answer some more of these questions that women in the fire service have. And the information is important that we share it with everybody. And it's important, for instance, for managers to be able to know what all staff are experiencing, regardless of kind of sex too. Okay, so that's me done. So thank you very much everyone else for kind of listening, and thanks to those that work on our projects with us and kind of all the different fire services that have been involved, and to you guys for organising this and all these seminar talks. It's been really good.
Thanks, Emily. That was a really nice presentation. Just a couple of questions. Question on the chat from Andy Siddle, who I think is still at Chichester. What Andy is asking is, he's talking about the sex differences, and so the differences potentially in sweat rate between men and women. He said, if one possible reason for the reduced sweat rate in women is body fat or surface area to volume relationship, is it possible that greater fat-free mass is related to greater sweat rate, and therefore there is a trade-off between having the muscle mass to perform effectively and having little enough to limit the sweat rate to mitigate dehydration? So I guess what he's asking is the interplay between physical capabilities versus an alteration in sweat rate as a result of fat-free or fat mass.
Yeah, potentially you're exactly right. There might be an interplay between those, and it's a case of how do you maximise one while not completely rubbishing out the other. I do think in this scenario, though, that when we're talking about hydration and when we're talking about everything else, we have to then consider that we are, yes, putting PPE on top of it. And so sweat does not kind of have its usual function that we typically think about sweat having. And so then if we do end up with a reduced sweat response, what is the consequence of that in PPE when we're talking about repeated exposures? And I'm not quite sure, Anthony, you can correct me otherwise, but I'm not quite sure I've seen data on that in terms of exact sweat responses and what happens. if you would like to help me collect some data and run something and actually find out the answer, then more than happy to have a chat and work it out. Great.
Couple of questions sort of for both of you. So maybe we'll ask Anthony first, and then Emily can chip in if you've got anything to add. One of the things that was seen quite evident from both of your talks was that there's a large range of individuals in your population. So obviously we tend to think of, you know, research participants as nice and homogenous, and we try to sort of make sure that all the noise is minimized and we have these nice homogenous groups, which when you work in the real world obviously isn't the case. So I mean, I guess from a practical point of view, Anthony, do you make allowances for that? So do different people do different jobs, or are they required to all do the same things? And from Emily's point of view, I guess, how do you balance that from a research perspective? How do you balance trying to minimize the variation within a group, but also then representing the group you want to actually assess?
Okay, so in terms of from an operational standpoint, and again, I can only really talk about the Australian experience and probably the British one, is that everybody who pulls on or wears that yellow helmet and climbs on the truck does the same job. There's not a great deal of allowance for, you know, if you can't carry something, you become the weak link. What they tend to do though is self-select out of those operational roles. So you'll see they'll go into a communications center role, they'll go into a training role, they'll go into something different. The problem is the way governments nowadays have cut the budget so tight is there's very few non-operational roles for firefighters. So what you'll find is they just tend to try and hire as best they can.
I suppose I'll add on from what Anthony just said, in that I think the same counts in the UK. Everyone has to meet the same fitness standards. Everyone has to meet those standards to get into the service and maintain them. And so they're all required to do the same job and be able to. I think that doesn't necessarily mean that at every fire instance, everybody is doing everything exactly the same. I think good services and good watches work to each other's strengths and weaknesses. They know what people are particularly good at and areas that people are particularly kind of strong on, and they work as a team, much like all teams should, in terms of maximising their capabilities to work together. In terms of from a research perspective, yes, it's quite difficult. It doesn't work in the perfect world like a lot of research does. We tend to come at it from two kind of perspectives. The first being, can we try and nail something down in a controlled laboratory situation with as few of those variations as possible first? Or has somebody already done that bit beforehand and got it? Kind of a lot of those studies to do with menstrual cycles are already to do with really controlled groups, really specific age ranges, really controlled experiments. And then thinking about, well, how do we develop that? Do I then answer the question in the lab and then I can go look at it in the field and go and work in the different live firehouses? Or do I then need to make it kind of realistic to my population? So it kind of means taking two approaches to research, essentially. But it means that what we find at the end is more applicable to the people that we're trying to work with.
Fantastic. And then one question from one of the attendees, from Joel Pang. He says, thanks, Emily and Anthony. He's seen some work using ECG as a device to look at heat exhaustion / stroke, and considering the high heart rates that firefighters will experience during training and operations, do either of you have any thoughts on using ECG to monitor the risk of heat injuries or illnesses?
Do you want to go first, Anthony? No?
I think it's almost a late, while it may seem like a great idea, I think it's almost a leap too far at this point in terms of what these guys are prepared to tolerate. I think an ECG is definitely preferable, and particularly when we start to see those heat issues starting to cause problems. I'd be happy with a heart rate monitor. Would be like, I'd start there, just getting that on them. But you can imagine the actual logistics of the bells drop, you've got to climb out, you've got to get your gear, you've got to get your BA on, you've got to find your helmet, your gloves, you've got to read the map. If we could build that into some sort of shirt that they wear all the time, that'd be spectacular. But I think it's a technical limitation rather than a benefit.
Yeah, we've so Anthony mentioned earlier on about kind of monitoring temperature and about the fact that at the moment that's something they don't do. We've been trying to do we've been playing around with lots of different bits of kit in terms of how can we actually measure heart rate and core temperature. Initially from an instructor's perspective, because you should be in a safe environment and there is no excuse for any of your individuals dying in a training situation. And so really we should be monitoring them there. But then also if we can broaden that out to an operational perspective, that would be great. Unfortunately, the tech just doesn't exist in a way that is logistically usable right now. We've tried earpieces, we've tried kind of vests, we've tried heart rate monitors of different kinds. And really it's a trade-off between, can we actually measure it, a core temp pill? That means we've got to swallow it way in advance and it costs a lot of money. Versus can we use things like heart rate monitors and ECGs? Well, some of it is based on algorithms. How good are those? And yeah, the logistics of the vests and ECG aspect, we've tried it out in our recent study with instructors and operational firefighters. And we've had individuals wearing vests that capture that kind of data throughout the day. The problem is then when they go out on a call, they have to put a recording device in, and actually getting that in the right way round, quick enough to actually record data has meant, I think almost like 60 or 70% of our data is rubbish as a consequence, because it just isn't working. It doesn't work, it's not right. And it's something that we're trying, we're playing with, and hopefully we'll get to a point where we can monitor some of these individuals. We're working on it essentially.
Fantastic. So yeah, thank you very much to both of you. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. Like I say, the video will be available on YouTube afterwards. Just to highlight some of the upcoming presentations covering a range of environmental stressors. So we have pollution next week. Then we have our multi-environmental stressor talk from Trent Stellingworth and Evan Dunphy. An exercise in the cold. We do, as I said earlier, we do have a full quota right up until the 23rd of July now. Myself, Stephen and Tade have committed to running these as long as there is demand, and depending on how long we're in lockdown for. I've also committed to not shaving, so I might look a bit like Santa if we're still in the situation by Christmas. But if you can join us, these ones are all at the more usual time of 4 p.m. UK time, so 7 hours later than that. So I appreciate that that's not convenient for everyone, and so these will also be available on YouTube afterwards. We do have some more at this time coming up, and you can check icee2021.com for more information about that. Also, just to highlight that we are planning on to host a sort of mini virtual student-led conference in July, and details will be forthcoming on that. So once again, thank you very much to Emily and to Anthony, and thank you very much for joining.